Thank you for joining us for the New Mexico State House debates. I'm Fred Martino. It is so good to be with you for this program. We also have a partner, the Greater Las Cruces Chamber of Commerce. We give special thanks to them. The rules for our debate are very simple. We're going to alternate between Chamber and KRWG questions. The candidates will have 60 seconds to answer, and they should not mention their opponent in that answer. We begin with District 33. Bill McCamley is the Democrat, the Republican, Angelina Carver. The first question is from the Chamber, and it is Joel Courtney representing the Chamber tonight. Joel?
All right, Bill. We have a changing work environment in the world today, especially with the aerospace industry coming on so strong. How do you propose to better prepare New Mexico's workforce for that job environment?
Well, it's all about combining your educational resources with your job creation resources. The way you create jobs in any economy is by targeting the type of industry you want to bring in. So as you pointed out, the spaceport, for instance, is one of the opportunities that we have as a community to create new jobs and bring money into our environment. But you've got to have the trained workforce that will be able to take advantage of those jobs. And your education sector, public schools, higher education, Doña Branch, that sort of thing, really have to do a good job of training those kids that are going to come up and graduate at being able to have the option to get those jobs. And if I'm elected to the legislature, one of the things I really want to push education-wise is a lot more math, science, engineering education. Taking what New Mexico State is doing with the early college high school, for instance, and working that out, expanding the aeronautical engineering program so that our kids have the best opportunities to be able to get the jobs that are being created here.
Angelina?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I agree. I think we need to combine our education system with our workforce. I would like to propose increasing opportunities like apprenticeships and mentorships, on-the-job training, along with the high school students or early college or college. And as they are preparing in their degrees, that they have opportunities during the summers or during the school years to be able to actually have hands-on experiences. This way, when they finish their degrees, they not only have their degree, but they have some background with their degree, and they're able to move into the positions much better. And it is really important to keep our students in New Mexico, because at this point we are exporting our greatest resource, which is our children.
Okay, our next question is on health coverage. Federal health reform was designed to expand Medicaid, with the federal government paying 100% the first 3 years and 90% thereafter. Do you support accepting this expansion, yes or no, and why? And Angelina, we'll begin with you.
I think this mandate is not written in the best way. I do not support it as it is written. I do think that we do need to have some expansion. But people will say, okay, the government will pay for this for 3 years, but you have to consider it kind of like a balloon payment. Yes, they will pay, and then all of a sudden New Mexico is responsible for like $500 million. And in a balanced budget state, it's hard to allot for that in a one lump sum. But I think as we look at the regulations and start making expansions and a gradual, progressive way, then I think we will be able to provide insurance to more citizens, but at a rate that our state can afford.
150,000 New Mexicans would be eligible for health insurance under this expansion. For us to not take this opportunity that the federal government is offering to us is frankly irresponsible. If you don't have health insurance and you get hurt, how are you going to go try to find a job? How are you going to take care of your kids? And furthermore, we're actually spending more money now than we could be if health insurance was available, because taking care of problems early is more effective both for the folks that are hurt and cost-wise than waiting till you have an emergency and having to go to the emergency room. I've been without health care insurance. I understand how terrified people are of going to see a doctor if they don't have insurance. And if you do something to yourself, if you break your finger and you don't go see a doctor and it becomes infected and it gets worse and worse and worse, you're actually going to spend more money in the long run than if you invest now. So I absolutely support this plan, both because it's good for our costs and it's good for average everyday folks.
All right. So the Desert Southwest has been a very attractive place for businesses because of our available land, our climate, and our proximity to the border. What is your plan for New Mexico to stay competitive in business recruitment and development despite our low budget for economic development with neighboring states?
Sure. The answer to that is very, very simple. You must target. You can't just say cut taxes and cut regulations. States like Mississippi and Alabama and Tennessee have low taxes and low regulations and still don't do well competitively. What you must do is focus your resources, both at the infrastructure level and at the education level, on targeted industries that you want to bring in. The spaceport we've kind of already talked about is a great opportunity for us. The West Mesa of Las Cruces has Sapphire Energy, a biodiesel research facility, which has the opportunity to expand out. We need to work on that and grow that. We have a lot of films in New Mexico that are filmed here, but then they go back to California to produce them. Can we do a much better job of creating that secondary market? And that's how you bring money into your economy. Construction, restaurants, hotels, all of those types of businesses will benefit from that if we target and specify.
I think it's important to bring more jobs into our state. We, right now, are very heavily dependent on government for positions and buildings and our infrastructure. We need to become more of a private business economy. We need to build that up. And green energy does provide some employment, such as he said Sapphire with natural gas, biodiesel fuel, solar, wind. Those are some areas to explore. But I think on the private level, I think instead of having everything government subsidized, there are a few companies in Albuquerque that are doing things from a private perspective. And I think we need to really boost the small business and private sector so that we have jobs that are growing, and the more that the business grows, the more successful we will be as a state.
We live in the desert with a very limited water supply, yet we have few restrictions on development. Should we consider restrictions, yes or no, and why? Angelina.
With our water supply, one of the things that's really important is that we have to have it adjudicated. The State Office of Engineers has been working to try and release waters to our area, and this has been bottlenecked by some of the lawsuits and stuff that have come at them. They need to be able to have the freedom to work with these different entities in order to free the water so that we have more water coming through our state through the Rio Grande. Do we need to build? Yes, we need to take that into consideration with the building that we're doing for infrastructure, but I think the first primary thing is to adjudicate the water.
Bill?
Water adjudication is important, and when you spend 10, 15 years fighting out water rights, it creates a situation where nobody gets it. So you do want to have a water court process that is a more efficient legal way of getting people water, but that's not the only thing you need to do. We need to work on being more efficient. 80% of the water here in the Mesilla Valley is used in irrigation, and it's the flood irrigation. And if we do a better job of doing things like drip irrigation, which is small hoses that run under the ground and feed plants at their roots, we're going to allow more water up for residential use. We need to do a better job with green building codes. And when we build homes in this state, we don't do a real good job right now of saying to the builders, hey, we were going to give you incentives to do things like low-flow toilets, low-flow shower heads, things like that, to be more efficient with the water we have. And lastly, we really need to look at water desalinization. Over in Alamogordo, they have a research facility where they're looking at taking brackish water resources, filtering out the brine and the salt, and being able to use that. And that's the sort of thing we look at to be more efficient and create more water resources for both business, farming, and residential use.
All right. 3 years ago, the state passed informed consent legislation to protect commercial space flight providers. But we lack a informed consent legislation to protect commercial spaceflight manufacturers, unlike many other neighboring states. What is your position on passing this expanded informed consent legislation?
I support expanding the informed consent to manufacturers, and here's why. Right now, the space industry is brand new, and you don't know a lot of the things that are going to happen with the new technology that you're putting on these spaceships. And if someone is willing, in an experimental level, to sign a consent form saying, I'm going to ride this extremely new, extremely experimental ship up into space, and I'll take the risk for that, then I think they should be allowed. Now, as long as there's a sunset clause on there, eventually the technology should not be considered experimental anymore. And the court process that we have here in the United States does provide accountability for people in all sorts of fields to make sure that they do a good job in medicine, in industry, and all sorts of things. So I believe that we should have informed consent. We should welcome the space industry here, as long as it's got some mutually agreeable time frame for when that will sunset, and then they'll be amenable to the regular court process.
I think we should expand that informed consent. I think as a healthcare provider, if somebody was going to go through a procedure, you want them to know all the risks. And I think with the spaceport, they need to know all the risks. They need to know what could potentially happen. And again, if they agree to go on the flight, it is very experimental. If they agree to go on the flight, then I think they will be held to that responsibility. I agree also with my opponent that there should be a time limit in order to say this is the informed consent is met up to until this point, because most of the bugs should have been worked out, and I think that this gives opportunity to work out all the new technology, all the new computer generated aspects to this, and I think that this will give the spaceport much better chance of developing as a industry.
Okay. Full disclosure before this next question, NMSU, like many public employers, participates in a state pension plan. It is likely the state legislature will be considering bills to shore up the pension systems of public employees. If state employees are asked to pay more, should the state also pay an equal amount in additional funding? Yes or no, and why? Angelina.
I think that I believe that with the current events, the pension fund has been depleted a little bit, that I think that because this year we do have surplus in funds, that we have the opportunity to shore up some of those funds, and if the employees are asked to pay an additional part, yes, I do think the state should be allowable to make up some of the difference as well. I think this is a prime opportunity since we do have a surplus.
Yeah, if you're asking the employees to pay more in because you're having these problems with the funding, everyone needs some skin in the game. Everyone needs to make some sacrifices. So I actually do support everybody putting a little bit in so that you come up with an agreement that everybody can live with. That being said, we've really got to do a better job as a society as a whole with how we do retirement. 30, 40 years ago, when retirement gets put in, people work, they start working at 18, they retire 25 years later, and people live till be in their early 60s. That's not the way that it works anymore. People are living well into their 70s and 80s. And not only that, the quality of life for folks when they're older is a lot better, so they want to work longer. So we've got to look holistically at the way we do retirement. Should people have to work longer? Probably. Are there new ways of working out retirement funding levels so that they reflect this kind of changing reality? Yeah. And we can't just say yes or no, this is the one way. Everybody's got to come to the table. Everybody's got to put some skin in the game and come up with a system that everybody can live with.
All right, manufacturers in New Mexico are subject to a process some call tax pyramiding, where they are taxed for the purchase of materials and on the sales of finished goods. What's your position on the removal of tax pyramiding for New Mexico manufacturers?
It's got to take place once again holistically. There are something like 300 separate different tax incentives in this state. And the state has the responsibility of going forward and saying, all right, look, let's look at everything that comes down. What works, what doesn't. If pyramiding, for instance, is really stopping manufacturing from coming in because other states don't do it or whatever, can you put in a provision that takes that away to attract those businesses here? On the other hand, if we have tax incentives and tax cuts for businesses that aren't really bringing anything to the state and we're losing revenue that way, maybe those need to get extricated. So I think with tax revenue, or with tax policy as a whole, it is incumbent upon us to take a very hard, very deep, very, once again, holistic look at the tax system that we have here, figure out what works, what doesn't, what brings in jobs, what doesn't, and come up with a new plan from there.
With the pyramiding, for example, if a builder is building a house, he gets taxed on some of the supplies that he purchases, and then it builds upon everything that goes into the house. So there's tax upon tax upon tax into a building, and it's created this pyramid. And so one single item, like a house, may have had 30 different types of taxes put on them by the time the house is completed. I think we do need to look at the overall tax structure, and we need to look and see what we can do to make business more friendly. We need to look and see what we can do to help manufacturers so that they are not taxed on everything that they purchase or make, but come up with a product that is based on one type of tax. So I think we do need to have an overhaul of our tax structure.
Nearly half of states, including our neighbors, Texas and Arizona, have right-to-work laws that are widely supported by business groups. Unions argue that these laws create a so-called free rider problem in which employees benefit from collective bargaining without paying union dues. Would you support a right-to-work law in New Mexico, yes or no, and why?
I would support a right-to-work law in New Mexico. I think this is such an area we are trying to expand jobs, trying to create, that in some areas where it may be with a union, let's say contracting, some people may be union laborers, but something comes along and they need to have extra help on that particular structure that's being built. I think that we need to be able to be open, and I think New Mexico is pretty open in terms of hiring people that are not union labor. I think that's why we have so many undocumented. We have a lot of people in here that are working and being used in jobs that are not union labor, but they're being used in the job. So I think we need to be open to the idea of the right-to-work law.
I do not support right-to-work legislation. I believe that unions play a vital role in protecting regular folks. I mean, why do unions exist? You have an employer who has basically all the power, and the argument is, well, if you don't like it, go work somewhere else. But if all the employers get together and say, we're only going to pay $2 an hour, and there's no union set up to say, hey, you know, we want to collectively bargain, we want to come together and argue for our rights, then you're going to have a system where there's too much power in this very, very rich, very, very top-down way. And so I support unions. I don't agree with unions all the time. In fact, when I was on the county commission, we had some issues with the government unions, and we try to work them out. I've also had some issues with some of the teachers unions saying, look, it's up to you guys to come up with an accountability system that will work together. But if we don't have collective bargaining, if we don't have unions in this state, regular average folks lose the ability to get things that benefit them.
All right. Each year, candidates talk about the need for ethics reform within the legislature. What are your ethics reform priorities, and how do you propose to implement them?
Well, I actually rewrote personally the county ethics code when I first became a county commissioner in 2004, and so have some ideas at the state level. I've also been involved with the state group Common Cause, which looks at this stuff. First of all, you have to have an independent ethics panel. When the legislature is in charge of seeing all of the ethics complaints themselves, you have people that work with each other every day and have relationships. It's not okay for them to be judging their peers because they're going to be biased. Separate ethics panel to talk about things that come up. Number two, we've got to have more transparency. I think Citizens United was one of the worst decisions the Supreme Court ever made, not only because it allowed a lot of money, but allowed people who donate large amounts of money to stay behind the shadows. I think they should actually have to come and say, I'm donating a certain amount for this thing. Thirdly, you've got to have find some ways of getting that money down. And fourthly, I actually will propose, if I'm elected, a bill that makes 90-day elections. No spending or raising money until 90 days before the elections. I think people are sick of them. We don't need any more of that time, and it will help bring the money down.
Ethics reform is an area that we really need to look at in terms of campaigning. There is so much that has driven the cost of campaigns that it's almost ridiculous. To hear the millions and millions of dollars that are spent on our presidential campaign, when you know the position is not even paying that much in terms of the position. Not that one equals the other. But the idea is that there is so much money that is spent in a campaign that is unaccounted for, and it's not necessarily needed to get your point across. There are different ways. I think we need to be more creative in how we get our ideas across, how we promote ourselves. I think we need to be a little bit more creative. We're heading into a time of recession, and it's kind of harsh to see how much money is spent in this campaign structure.
Okay, we're running out of time. This is our final question, and I will ask the candidates for as brief an answer as possible because we're a little behind. Do you support affirmative action in state employment, state contracts, and university admissions? Yes or no, and why? Angelina.
No, I don't support the affirmative action. I think affirmative action was very helpful back in the 50s and 60s when we were trying to make people more equal with each other, but I think we've come a long way. As a Hispanic woman, there's a lot that has been open to me and I've had to work for. And I think that people that are in education or in positions, I think we need to be accepting of people based on their merit, based on their ability, based on what they can accomplish.
As of now, I still do support affirmative action. I'll tell you why. My grandfather had a job in the 30s working at a car factory in Michigan. At that point in time, it was still very legal in this country to not hire someone or pay them less because of their race, because of the pigment in their skin. And because my grandfather was able to have a job, my dad was the first person to go to college in their family. He went into the Army, became a lieutenant colonel, and did pretty good. And therefore, I was able to come out and have the opportunities that maybe someone who was in a different race, whose family was discriminated against back years ago, does not have. So until we reach that point, and I don't think we're there yet, until we reach that point, I do support affirmative action programs to make sure everybody, regardless of their race, has the opportunity to make it in this country.
We thank our candidates in District 33, Democrat Bill McCamley and Republican Angelina Carver. Thank you. We move on now to District 36. The candidates in District 35 couldn't be with us for this program, and for District 36 we have Democrat Philip Archuleta with us. The Republican and Independent candidates couldn't be here. Our first question is from Joel Courtney of the Greater Las Cruces Chamber of Commerce.
Many experts in education say students today will be in careers that do not even exist yet. How do you propose to better prepare New Mexico's workforce to fit that changing job environment?
I think what we need to do in New Mexico right now, we need to get our kids educated. Number one, my opinion is that a lot of kids cannot afford to go to the universities, and there's a way of helping them out because we have what you call trade programs, apprenticeship programs, vocational school. I think that the state needs to work closer with the vocational schools and work closer with some of these trades, union trades, that have the apprenticeship program. Many of our people don't know that the apprenticeship program will train the employee during the day and teach them the class at night, but they're working at the same time. There needs to be a change in what's happening because it's not working right now. The past has to change, and we have to find out how. We have to make sure that one of the problems that I see that when there's money coming to education, it stays at the top level instead of down to the employees who do the work.
Federal health reform was designed to expand Medicaid, with the federal government paying 100% the first 3 years and 90% thereafter. Do you support accepting this expansion, yes or no, and why?
I do support it because, first of all, we have a lot of people that are uninsured right now. For the safety and protection of the people, we should accept this money. A lot of people are saying that the government aren't sure that we will be able to carry us through 2019. The federal government has helped us in different areas in the state offices, unemployment, health, and they have never broken up. If we take this money, I can assure you it will be there. In 2019, if we go with the expansion, the economic and jobs will be better, for people will be back to work and they can afford their insurance. But this is something that we must do because right now it's not working. We're on the wrong path.
Because of our available land, climate, and the proximity to the border, the Southwest has been very attractive to many businesses. What is your plan for New Mexico to stay competitive with business recruitment and development despite our low budget for economic development?
Well, I think that what we need to do, first of all, we have to make sure that the employers that have jobs now, we protect those. If employers want to come in and develop some more jobs, we have to make sure that they come in, and we can give them an incentive if they hire local employees. I worked for the Department of Labor for 25 years as a labor law administrator, and I saw a lot of cheating going on, employers stealing money from employees on prevailing wages or regular pay. I've dealt with that, and my opinion is because so many contractors from out of state have so much money, they come and outbid our lower contractors in the Cruces, honest contractors that could do jobs. We need to create jobs, but we need to make sure that these employers that are going to get the incentive pay, that they must hire our local employees down here.
We live in the desert with a very limited water supply, yet we have few restrictions on development. Should we consider restrictions, yes or no, and why?
Well, I think there should be some restriction on the developers. I believe that everybody has the right to develop, but if you look at it now, the farmers and the ranchers, they have restriction by the Department of Agriculture in Santa Fe, and the developers don't. We have to find a way where we can work with both the farmers, the ranchers, and the developers. Right now, the developers are getting the water and the farmers are losing the water. We have to find a way with the state of engineer, which is the administration of the president governor, that has put so many regulations only on the farmers but not on the developers.
All right. The state passed an informed consent law 3 years ago to protect commercial spaceflight providers. What is your position on expanding that informed consent legislation to protect commercial spaceflight manufacturers?
Well, first of all, I don't want to be a hypocrite. I campaigned against the spaceports the last time. I wasn't for the spaceport, and the reason I wasn't for it because they are planning to build a railroad from Albuquerque to the spaceport. So you stop to realize they're promising all these jobs for us here in the Cruces in Doña County. But if they build that railroad from Tier C to Albuquerque, who do you think people are going to fly to, El Paso to Albuquerque? For one reason, they're going to fly to Albuquerque and they're going to come down in the train. Now the spaceport, if we have to expand it and give them some more money, we have to make sure again, when they built the highway for the spaceport, they brought a company out of Wyoming and they brought their own employees. I know because I was enforcing the labor laws, the prevailing wages, and we went over there many times to inspect the employees that were not getting paid correctly.
Fair disclosure before this next question, NMSU, like many public employers, participates in a state pension plan. It is likely that the state legislature will be considering bills to shore up the pension systems of public employees. If state employees are asked to pay more, should the state also pay an equal amount in additional funding? Yes or no, and why?
As a former state employee, I think they should. I know the response on that because every time that the insurance go up, the wages don't, so the employees lose. There's a way to do this. There's a lot of employees that are ready to retire, that are making so much per hour because they moved up in their ears. Once those employees retire, the new employees will get half a pay of what they're earning right now because they're new employees. They themselves have to build up. So why should the employees take the load to pay more on the insurance when the state has the money and the way of working with people who are ready to retire to be able to hire new employees? There's more ways to do this than just say, you know, we're not going to pay for it. I think if the state increases the pension, the employees have to meet their part. But the state has more money than the employees because the employees never get a raise. And those that get a raise are the ones that are in the administration, top administration. The working men and women, the backbone of state employees, never get a raise in the last 3-4 years.
Manufacturers in New Mexico are subject to a process that some call tax pyramiding, where they are taxed for the purchase of materials and for the sale of finished goods. What is your position on the removal of tax pyramiding for manufacturers in New Mexico?
I don't support that. I think everybody should be taxed. As my opponents, both of them believe that there should be less tax for the rich people and more for the poor. Both of them stated that they want less taxes for the oil and gas company or any corporate company coming from out of state, any corporate company making business from out of state. They have to pay the same taxes as we do. We are the working people. We have to pay our taxes. Any company that does business in New Mexico should pay taxes just like anybody else.
Nearly half of states, including our neighbors, Texas and Arizona, have right-to-work laws that are widely supported by business groups. Unions argue that these laws create a so-called free rider problem in which employees benefit from collective bargaining without paying union dues. Would you support a right-to-work law in New Mexico, yes or no, and why?
I would not support a right-to-work state in New Mexico. The experience that I've had for the last 25 years, that was part of my job, doing inspection, hearing officer for wages not paid. The reason that we have the unions is because it's fair to protect the working men and women. But not only that, a lot of people think that it's just to protect the working men and women. If you have a good paying job, you're going to hire professional people and they're going to get paid the fair wages, and your building is going to be built correctly. If they do away with collective bargaining, they're going to hire anybody that wants to work for $7.50 an hour, and they're going to build the building without even knowing what they're doing. It's been proven. The professional workers, they're hired by the unions, especially in prevailing wages, are people who have been trained and have been trained to do the work they do. For example, carpenters, laborers, plumbers, different trades. That's why the prevailing wages is there. If we let the employers take control of the wages and everything else, hey, they're going to hire cheap wages, cheap employees, and cheap work.
Each year, candidates talk about the need for ethics reform within the legislature. What are your ethics reform priorities, and how do you propose to implement them?
Well, I think there has to be an ethics reform in Santa Fe. There's no question about it. But one of the problems that we're seeing right now, especially as a candidate, I see it more. I raised $16,000 by myself from friends and family. I didn't get no corporate company money or out-of-state money like my opponents have. You have Reform New Mexico that's spending millions and millions of dollars, which is run by the Republicans. When I, as a candidate myself, is supporting myself, I cannot compete to their money. So I think the worst thing they could have done was create a PAC. I think we need to make sure that the people who are going to be running for office should not be taking money from out-of-state money, because at that time is when they sell their soul to the people from out of state or big companies. If we were to work like me, raising my own money, when I go to Santa Fe, I'm not going to owe anybody anything. I'm going to vote my conscience, not the popular or political vote. I'm going to vote my conscience, and I don't know anybody anything.
Our final question now, do you support affirmative action in state employment, state contracts, and university admissions? Yes or no, and why?
I support affirmative action because, first of all, our human rights division laws are very weak, and the EEOC laws are very weak. I work for human rights. I know the laws. Our labor laws and human rights laws are very weak. I was born in the 60s. I was raised in the 60s, where I saw a lot of discrimination. And they're still happening. It's still happening. A lot of people don't realize that we have taken a step backwards when it comes to discrimination. I was civil rights chair for LULAC for 7 years. I defended employees in many ways because our laws are not strong enough to protect the employee.
Democrat Philip Archuleta in District 36. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We move on now to District 37. I'm pleased to have with us in the studio Republican Terry McMillan and Democrat Joanne Ferrari. Thank you both for being with us.
Thank you for having us.
Good to have you here. Our first question is from the Greater Las Cruces Chamber of Commerce and Joel Courtney. Joel.
Many experts in education say that today's students will be in careers that do not exist yet. How do you propose to better prepare New Mexico's workforce for this changing job environment?
I think it's really important to work with the New Mexico labor group that is trying already to align a lot of our educational and training courses that will align with the businesses that are growing in New Mexico already, such as healthcare and also our clean energy. We have a great opportunity for solar, wind, biofuels, geothermal. So if we can have our workforces trained properly and aligned with those job opportunities, it would be great.
Thank you. I would mention that I think we have a local innovation that is pioneering an excellent way to try to help train future job candidates in an evolving technological world, and that's our bridge that was formed, a bridge between the local business community and our public schools, and through that the early college high school, and whose intent is to indeed help mainstream young people into career opportunities, allow them dual credits. I think this is an excellent innovation. In addition, I think increased emphasis upon the types of training that young people can get in junior colleges. I think increased emphasis on the degrees offered by our junior colleges, properly directed to the evolving job environment. And finally, continued support for our JTIP program, our Jobs Training Incentive Program, and even expansion of that to allow state government to help support on-the-job training of new employees in technological companies.
Federal health reform was designed to expand Medicaid, with the federal government paying 100% the first 3 years and 90% thereafter. Do you support accepting this expansion, yes or no, and why?
I do not support it. There are 2 or 3 reasons. I'll mention first of all the issue relating to the cost. After a few short years, the federal government will withdraw its 100% support of this program, and New Mexico will be faced with a rapidly increasing debt to fund. We don't have the resources this time, and I don't anticipate how we'll pay that. We're talking on the order of several $100 million. I have another issue with it as well, and that is the federal government, 40% of its expenditures currently are being borrowed from my children and grandchildren. This is, in my opinion, not real money, and it is not a moral procedure. I don't think we should be doing that at all. I think that we should not spend money that we don't have. I think it's a moral issue, and I would not vote to expand Medicare unless I heard in the presidential debate the other night, candidate Romney mentioned that he'd like to consider turning the Medicaid program over to the states, and I'd like to have the opportunity to reform Medicaid in New Mexico.
Well, I am totally for it. I think expanding the Medicaid is a great opportunity and great boon for New Mexico. It would bring us $5.3 billion, and it would pay 100% the first 3 years and 90% the next 7. So our share would only be $408 million, but that money will be seen as a great opportunity for 17,000 new healthcare jobs. It will mean $411 million of state tax and revenue, and it will also, with the economic turnover and activity, it will create $7.75 billion for New Mexico. And we would be able to have healthcare for another 150,000 people in our state, and close to 20,000 just in Doña Ana County. So I see it as something that's a win-win. Win for New Mexico and win for our health care for our voters.
Because of our available land, climate, and our proximity to the border, The Desert Southwest has been very popular for businesses looking to expand or relocate. What is your plan for New Mexico to stay competitive with business recruitment and development despite our low budget for economic development compared to neighboring states?
Joanne.
I think we need to look at some of the different things that other states are doing. We need to make sure that we have those same kinds of opportunities. Such as with the spaceport, we need to make sure that we're not turning away different businesses just because we have different kinds of liabilities. We want to protect people, but we also need to make sure that we can attract businesses. We need to make sure that we are conducive to their tax credits. We need to make sure that we don't have a lot of red tape. We do need to have regulations to make sure that all businesses are on the same playing field. But that being said, we do need to make sure that we also make it so that there isn't unnecessary procedures and processes. And the PRC changes that we're looking at in the new amendments, that could help having their regulations and their reporting not be a part of the PRC, but go to the Secretary of State's office.
Thank you. Improving the climate for business and growing our economy and creating jobs will always have three facets: our tax structure, our regulatory environment, and I would submit also our tort environment. I would propose that I would be in favor of lowering our highest corporate income tax to the same level as the highest personal income tax level in New Mexico, which would be 4.9%. In the regulatory environment, I think I would favor passing the Model Administrative Procedures Act, which the federal government passed 50 or 60 years ago, and which standardizes the regulatory processes of our various agencies and commissions and departments and their interactions with businesses, so that businesses can come to expect the same treatment by every department with which they interact, and a time scale under which they can expect answers. They're also given the right to appeal decisions of various departments to our state court system. Finally, tort reform would be very helpful at promoting business growth in New Mexico.
Okay. Our next question: we live in the desert with, of course, very limited water supplies, yet we have few restrictions on development. Should we consider restrictions, yes or no, and why?
I think development must always be regulated like any other part of our economy, our business, our economy. We cannot expect to have the most fruitful, efficient development process if we do not have some degree of regulations. I do not believe that our environmental regulations should exceed those of the federal government. Neither should any of our coding restrictions exceed those of the federal government. So yes, I certainly believe that growth and development should be properly regulated to spend our dollars more wisely and protect consumers, but not inordinately so that it inhibits and strangles the free enterprise system.
Well, I agree partially. I think we should have careful growth, but we need to encourage growth because that means that we will be attracting more businesses and people to moving to southern New Mexico. And we can preserve our resources by limiting the number of uses by agriculture, making sure that new developments in irrigation, because they use 80% of the water in farming. We need our farming and agriculture to thrive, but we also need to make it so it's more efficient with the water so that people, when we do have new developments, will have the water resources needed for the people to use. But we also have new opportunities in technology also, where water, we have a lot of brackish water, but that water can be reclaimed and used for different things that, you know, we still have enough water for people to thrive.
3 years ago, New Mexico passed informed consent legislation to protect commercial spaceflight providers, but it lacks protection for commercial spaceflight manufacturers. What is your position on expanding our informed consent legislation to protect those commercial spaceflight manufacturers?
I think this is a really difficult question. You want to be sure that people are protected, and especially those who are innocent bystanders. But you also want to make sure that you don't have egregious lack of carefulness on the part of providers. But we also don't want to turn away businesses that might be providing those kinds of materials for the spaceflight. So we have kind of a difficult question of making sure that people are protected, and also that we also aren't turning away businesses.
Now, thank you. I would support the proposed expansion. I would not support expansion to include people on the ground that might be injured by such operations. But all of those who agree and sign on the dotted line and accept that this is a risky activity, I think that we should expand the exceptions that would allow protection to all the manufacturers and operations that are involved in the spaceport. Furthermore, I would like to see other tort reform in New Mexico. This would help improve our tort environment, our business environment. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce considers New Mexico 44th on a list of 50 states in terms of the friendliness of our tort environment to the growth of our economy and business. I'm looking at two bills that I'll introduce myself and considering introducing. One that would cap awards for pain and suffering and punitive awards in the state, and another one that would stop this process of venue shopping that's rampant in our state.
Okay. Fair disclosure before this next question, NMSU, like many public employers, it participates in a state pension plan. It is likely that the state legislature will be considering bills to shore up the pension systems of public employees. If state employees are asked to pay more, should the state also pay an equal amount in additional funding? Yes or no, and why?
Yes, I have reviewed the peer board's recommendations, which they've come to by a long and difficult process. And I've also talked with shareholders in the community, including some policemen and firemen, the local policemen's union. They're making several concessions in order to shore up these retirement funds, including they're making an extra contribution. They're waiting longer for cost of living increases. And so, yes, I think it's reasonable to expect the state to match the contribution that these state employees are making.
I agree also. I think it's in everyone's interest that we have a strong state pension system. We used to have a top-rated funding in the nation, and we can have that again. And if we have that support from increased wages to the employees, then they can also make increased contributions to that also. We need to make sure that this is something that will stay solvent and will protect all of the state employees.
Manufacturers in New Mexico are subject to a process that some call tax pyramiding, where they are taxed for the purchase of raw materials and on the sale of finished goods. What is your position on the removal of tax pyramiding for manufacturers?
I think that we don't have that many manufacturers in New Mexico, but if the products are being taxed several times, it should be just passed on to the consumer. We also have it where as things are gathered together, you have to have a chain of responsibility for those taxes and how it is being made, because you don't know what the end result is going to be. If you tax it at each point, it does add up, but I think the consumer would then just be able to absorb that.
Thank you. I would support eradicating tax pyramiding from all of our tax structures. In the most recent legislative session, we were able to pass, and the governor signed legislation that removed some aspects of tax pyramiding from the construction industry. I think business-to-business gross receipts taxes should be abolished, and business-to-consumer interactions should be where gross receipts taxes are levied and paid. we have to compete with other states in the production of goods and services. And the more pyramiding we have in producing our goods and services, the less competitive we are. So it's in our interests to discontinue this practice of tax pyramiding.
Nearly half of states, including our neighbors in Texas and Arizona, have right-to-work laws that are widely supported by business groups. Unions argue that these laws create a so-called free rider problem in which employees benefit from collective bargaining without paying union dues. Would you support a right-to-work law in New Mexico, yes or no, and why?
I would support that legislation. There are a couple of reasons that I would cite. Evidence suggests that in entering the competitive market for migration of businesses into your state, these laws promote and encourage businesses to migrate into your state. And so I favor it for that reason. Secondly, I think it's fair to workers to be able to make a simple decision that they want a part of their check withheld to pay union dues, or they do not. And so I think workers that immigrate, that come into the state to work should have that right and choice.
I think this is a much bigger question than just someone being able to choose whether they pay dues or not. I think unions have been a part of our history for a long time. It's brought us the 40-hour work week, child labor laws, and safety regulations. We really can't afford to, have lower wages than what we already have, and unions help support that. And we have to quit assaulting the middle class. We just can't expect our economy to prosper if we're going to do that.
Each year, candidates talk about the need for ethics reform within the legislature. What are your ethics reform priorities, and how do you propose to implement them?
I think it would be great if we went back to having just public financing of campaigns. I think that would take a lot out of, special interests and lobby groups to support campaigns and have a voice. I think it's another part of, having corporations have a voice, and that's just not how it should be. People should be able to decide, and they should be able to connect with the campaign, not listen to all the different negative attacks, and we should be able to make it so that public financing pays for everyone.
I think we should continue the process of increasing transparency at the level of state government. We're currently broadcasting live the sessions from the floor of the House of Representatives and from the Senate. I think all the committee meetings should be broadcast live and made available for review on the internet by all of our constituents. There's been resistance to the filming and recording of these events, and I think that that should be resisted. All of these meetings should be made transparent and public. There's also room to create an ethics committee, and this notion has been kicked around for quite a while. I would support the creation of an ethics committee to field concerns and charges of ethics abuse or ethics violations. It should be constituted by the Supreme Court, and so should be kept out of the political environment completely. Its constituents most appropriately should be recruited from out of state to ensure that we have no one that has local political interests. So I favor the formation of an ethics commission.
Our next question, do you support affirmative action in state employment, state contracts, and university admissions? Yes or no, and why?
I do not. I think there was a time and place for affirmative action. We have a history of discrimination of all types, and it has been a long and difficult road, and part of the glory that I see in our country is the overcoming of many of these discriminations. And I think probably it was appropriate and necessary to have these guidelines in place at one point in our history. I think they're no longer necessary. And I think that they actually create more resentments and difficulties than they solve at this point in time.
I'm not so sure that we're there yet. I think there's still time that minority groups need to have an extra, support, and not so much an advantage, but possibly experience and things like that would also come into play. But especially for gender, I think women are still fighting for the same opportunities that have been given to men, and that we also need to look at having equal pay for equal work and making sure that that's being assessed in private and public sector.
Doña Ana County receives millions of dollars for infrastructure projects each year, which provides a great deal for our local economy. What are your infrastructure priorities for New Mexico?
Oh, I think that's a great question. We have a really great opportunity with the Camino Real Development Corridor, all the way from Sunland Park up to Hatch. And they are going to need to have the infrastructure that will help the roads and have the access to the border that is going to be expanding on the other side. Then also up to Santa Teresa, where they are having the Union Pacific Rail Yard. We're going to have a lot of employees come into that area that are going to need housing and possibly some medical facilities, and all of these things are going to need extra revenues to help bring them and get them started. So that, and also supporting continued support for schools, I think we really need to see New Mexico, southern New Mexico especially, and bring the revenues and the opportunities to our state.
Thank you. I think that our roads and highways have been neglected for a couple of decades. I think infrastructure monies should be made available for improving, redoing, and upgrading our highways. I think that's a first priority. Recently, in the last legislature, we approved capital outlay funding for development of the East Mesa Public Safety Complex. I'd like to see that completed. Also, our Mesilla Valley 911 dispatch station, we provided preliminary funding through our capital outlay monies to plan and develop and prepare for construction of that facility as well. And so those are local priorities that I'll stay behind.
New Mexico's medical marijuana law remains under attack. If approved by the state health department, a proposal going before the state's Medical Cannabis Advisory Board would remove about 40% of patients from the program who receive cannabis to deal with symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. Do you support the medical marijuana law, yes or no, and why?
I do support it. I think there are very appropriate indications for use of medical marijuana, and it has significant benefit in treatment of a lot of chronic conditions. And a certain number of expanding indications are coming to light. There may be some controversy about the treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder with medical marijuana, but I personally would prefer to leave that to appropriate experts. I'm in favor of making medical marijuana available to patients who suffer from a wide variety of medical conditions where it's been demonstrated to be helpful and effective.
I also agree.
All right, jobs are on the mind of every voter. What is your plan to bring more jobs to New Mexico?
I think part of the clean energy opportunities that we have for solar and wind and geothermal, and I'm really excited about the biofuels, being able to take algae and grow enough oil that would be able to replace all the oil in Iraq. And I think this is a great opportunity for southern New Mexico. We have the space, we have the brackish water that can be used, we have the technology, and we have people working together, private and public sector. And I think that's a great combination.
Once again, creating jobs in New Mexico has to do with promoting and creating an environment that's conducive to the rebound of our existing businesses and hopefully the ingrowth of new businesses. When we do this, we need to address our current tax structure, regulatory environment, and tort environment. I think we've talked about that briefly, but I favor looking at several aspects of our tax structure. For instance, the use of a single sales factor in calculating out-of-state income tax rates. New Mexico has a formula in which we use the amount of sales that a multi-state corporation generates, as well as their property and their payrolls, in calculating their out-of-state income tax rate. Be very simple to make it only their out-of-state sales, because we're shooting ourselves in the foot we're discouraging them from employing and purchasing and investing in their facilities in New Mexico. That's just one possible tax change that we could make to encourage business and growth. I also mentioned the Model General Procedures Act that we could implement that would go a long way to improving our regulatory environment for our businesses.
New Mexico ranks near the bottom nationally in child welfare. What are your plans to improve child welfare in New Mexico?
I think improving child welfare it principally goes to making sure that they have access to health care. I think we've done a lot in New Mexico to ensure that all of our children have access to health care. We have very generous ability to qualify children for Medicaid, rather, and our children have taken advantage of it. So I have no objection to expansion of Medicaid benefits for children. I would like to see Medicaid in some ways reformed, allowing for certain amounts of copays for some beneficiaries for their office visits, their medications, and their surgeries.
Yes, I think having Medicaid for children is really important. I've been a wish granter for Make-A-Wish for 15 years, and we've seen a lot of children whose families have gone into poverty. In fact, our country is one of the top in the nation for people going bankrupt because they didn't have medical care. But when you're a child, you will do anything. And so I think that families will be careful to help their children as much as they can. And so having job development and economic gardening and growing more jobs and supporting small businesses, I think will help our kids do a lot better too, making sure that their families can have the support that they need, and then with also the Medicaid for them to prosper and be healthy.
When Governor Richardson removed gross receipts tax on groceries and medicine, he also agreed to hold harmless local municipalities for those lost monies. What is your position on hold harmless reimbursement for municipalities, and how do you propose municipalities make up the revenue should hold harmless be removed?
Well, I totally disagree that the state has that right to not pay the cities. They've put them at a great peril because that is a lot of revenue loss that the state, when they made that agreement, promised to pay the cities and communities throughout New Mexico. So the state, I would totally be against the state not reimbursing those communities throughout the state for that loss. And I'm not sure that it's up to them to find it. They should just go ahead and start paying it if they can't find the funds to pay that to the communities as they promised.
I agree. I will continue to support the hold harmless policy towards our municipalities and counties. To remove that support suddenly and surreptitiously could really have a profound impact on local economy, the ability of our municipalities to pay their law enforcement, fire departments, all the very critical and important things that these governmental agencies provide to us. So I will continue to support the hold harmless clause.
We thank very much the candidates in District 37, Republican Terry McMillan and Democrat Joanne Ferrari. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we move on now to District 39. With us is Republican John Zimmerman. John, thank you so much for being here.
It's glad to be here.
Good to have you with us. Our first question is from the Greater Las Cruces Chamber of Commerce and Joel Courtney.
Many experts in education say that today's students will be in careers that do not exist yet. How do you propose to better prepare New Mexico's workforce to fit this changing job environment?
Well, I think that we have junior colleges that we need to get the different programs for some of these jobs that are coming around. We have the spaceport that's coming in, and I think there's a lot of jobs there that we don't have people trained for those jobs. We have a lot of retirees from White Sands, but they're an older generation, and they can only fill that void for a certain period of time. And so I really feel like that with the spaceport here in New Mexico, we have an excellent opportunity to do many things. I don't think a lot of people realize what the spaceport, they think it's just going to be a a venue for rich people to go into space. As a retired engineer from White Sands, I see a different perspective. I actually see the spaceport being used to launch satellites. Department of Defense is going to be using it. It makes sense to me to, when you have a satellite launch from sea level, if you can launch it from 5,000 feet, that's a whole lot cheaper. Your power to send it up in space is a lot different. So I see a big use for our spaceport, and I think we need to be prepared for that. And I would hope that we are moving towards that direction to train people, especially people for the spaceport.
Okay, our next question. Federal health reform was designed to expand Medicaid, with the federal government paying 100% the first 3 years and 90% thereafter. Do you support accepting this expansion, yes or no, and why?
Well, the answer is just definitely unequivocally no at this point. I think we're premature in saying that it's going to be expanded. We need to wait until after the November elections to find out whether or not that's the case. I don't support it one way or the other, but if it's forced upon us after the election, then certainly we'll have to I guess, confer with federal mandates. It's going to put New Mexico in a very precarious situation as far as financing this. They say that you know, there's figures out there, and I think it's voodoo in economics that we're looking at. So we don't know the real cost at this point.
Because of our available land, climate, and proximity to the border, the Southwest has been very attractive to businesses looking to relocate and expand. What is your plan for New Mexico to stay competitive for business recruitment and development despite our low budget compared to neighboring states?
Well, in the first place, one of the things that we can't get industry into New Mexico is due to the fact of our corporate tax structure. When neighboring states, the average tax rate for our neighboring states is somewhere around 5%, and I think we're up somewhere around 7.6, 7.8% for corporations that are out of state. I think in state they're about 4.8%. But we need to be competitive with our neighboring states. It's real important to be competitive. When we're not competitive with our neighboring states, we're not going to get industry in here. And until we do, that's the biggest setback that I think we have in the state.
We live in the desert with a very limited water supply, yet we have few restrictions on development. Should we consider restrictions, yes or no, and why?
That's a good question. Our water resources, first of all, are being taxed by farming, by ranching, by municipalities, and also in this district by mining interest. Well, I think we're under assault for a lot from different agencies for these water resources. We need to make sure that we protect those resources and preserve them any way we can so that we can facilitate all four of these, because they're all competing for these limited water supplies. We must remember that agriculture is a big part of this valley and has been. We also must remember that it's also a big part of the mining industry. Ranching is also a big part. So we can't forget any of these.
3 years ago, the state passed informed consent legislation to protect commercial spaceflight providers, but it lacks protection for commercial spaceflight manufacturers, which may be losing jobs for the state. What's your position on expanding the informed consent legislation to protect those commercial spaceflight manufacturers?
I'm for it. I do think that with informed consent, it speaks for itself. That means the person is actually informed of the dangers, and basically that's to cover the commercial space travel that consumers want to take part in. So I'm definitely for that.
Fair disclosure before this next question, NMSU, like many public employers, participates in a state pension plan. It is likely that the state legislature will be considering bills to shore up the pension systems of public employees. If state employees are asked to pay more, should the state also pay an equal amount in additional funding? Yes or no, and why?
Well, I think the answer to that, as far as I'm concerned, is yes. I think it's fair that an equal amount be put in by the state that you ask an employee to put in. So it's not unreasonable at all. So I mean, I think it's just requires a flat yes. I support that.
Manufacturers in New Mexico are subject to a process that some call tax pyramiding, where they are taxed for the purchase of raw materials and on the sale of finished goods. What is your position on the removal of tax pyramiding for New Mexico manufacturers?
Well, our recent legislative session actually removed some of that tax pyramiding, but there's more. Out-of-state corporations, for instance, are paying a tax on their supplies and different taxes, and we need to even that playing field. We need to have a standard that fits everybody, as opposed to just a select group. Our neighboring states have, as I said before, they have an overall average tax rate of around 5%. To be competitive and to get jobs and industry in this state, we're going to have to change our corporate tax structure so that we are competitive. And we are not competitive, and we are not business friendly in New Mexico because of that.
Nearly half of states, including our neighbors in Texas and Arizona, have right-to-work laws that are widely supported by business groups. Unions argue that these laws create a so-called free rider problem, in which employees benefit from collective bargaining without paying union dues. Would you support a right-to-work law in New Mexico, yes or no, and why?
A resounding yes, I would support a right-to-work law in New Mexico. Competition, I think, is imperative for achieving economies of scale in the workplace. I do think that unions play an important role, and they have in the past. I don't think they're as important now as they were some years back. So I would support a right-to-work law in New Mexico.
Each year, candidates talk about the need for ethics reform within the legislature. What are your ethics reform priorities for New Mexico?
I don't object to the system we currently have. I think that we should have maybe some kind of an ethics board or something or other that all state representatives, senators, state employees, everybody is held accountable to. Something similar to what the federal employees also are held accountable to. As a retired federal employee, we had certain ethics that we had to adhere to, and so I would not object at all to an ethics panel being formulated to look at ethics.
Do you support affirmative action in state employment, state contracts, and university admissions? Yes or no, and why?
I think affirmative act, first of all, that's a hard question. I think there's some yes and some no there. I think affirmative action has run its course in this country. I actually see some reverse, what I call reverse discrimination. And I think it's run its course. I think we need to stop pushing affirmative action. We need to start, there is some areas for some improvements. I think where women's wages are not equal to men for the same job, certainly that needs to be looked at very, very seriously. And but I think we can do some things there that don't necessarily require affirmative action. I think when that's brought up and it can be proven then in court, or that those things can be taken care of.
Each year, Doñana County receives millions of dollars for infrastructure, which provide a great deal to our local economy. What are your infrastructure priorities for New Mexico, and more specifically Doñana County?
Well, you know, as a representative for 3 different counties, when you say just Doñana County, it's really tough for me to say just Doñana County, because I need to look at infrastructure for Grant County, Sierra County, and Doñana County. I have a very small portion of Doñana County, and it's basically everything pretty much west of the Rio Grande, which is very rural area indeed, and farming. So other than roads, I don't see a lot of infrastructure needs in Doñana County in my district.
And we thank Republican John Zimmerman, running in District 39. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
We now move on to District 52 and Democrat Doreen Gallegos and Republican Arlington Brubaker. Thank you both for being with us. Our first question is from the Greater Las Cruces Chamber of Commerce and Joel Courtney.
Many experts in education say that today's students will be in careers that do not even exist yet. How do you propose to better prepare New Mexico's workforce for this changing job environment?
I think it's an exciting time for us as parents, as new students, because there's so many possibilities out there. I think we need to be job ready, and so part of that is to make sure that our Doñana branch and university are up with the latest technology and have the availability to give kids, students, as much knowledge as they can, education. I think that's the key to our success.
Hi, one thing, we need to teach our kids how to read right off the bat by 3rd grade, no, by 1st grade. But we also need to take it a step further and bring in vocations into the schools, VOTEC, bring other industry to where they can expand their technological skills, along with having the options of going into other education, such as universities or even at the doctorate level.
Federal health reform was designed to expand Medicaid, with the federal government paying 100% the first 3 years and 90% thereafter. Do you support accepting this expansion, yes or no, and why?
Not necessarily. I believe in covering and expanding the Medicaid system, but we've seen in other states to where the 3-year program, once that is stopped and the federal government fully funds it, what happens after that 3-year period? We may indeed get stuck here in New Mexico with a very large bill and a commitment that we cannot support financially.
And yes, I think we should fully fund it. I think it's a great opportunity. We have the opportunity to insure up to 300,000 New Mexicans. And that means 1 out of 3 of our neighbors, family members, and community members right now don't have insurance. It's a win-win. And if you look at the numbers, and I've looked at them several times, you know, it's going to bring more jobs into the area as well. It's going to bring medical professionals in. It's going to bring nurses in. It's going to bring techs in. We're going to be building more facilities. It's win-win all the way. So yes, I'm definitely for it.
Because of our available land, climate, and our proximity to the border, the Southwest has been very attractive to businesses looking to relocate and expand. What is your plan for New Mexico to stay competitive with business recruitment and development despite our low budget for economic development with neighboring states?
What a great day to be in New Mexico. You know, we can look at solar, we can look at wind, we can look at so many possibilities. And, you know, we have the perfect climate to be able to bring those jobs in and to really prosper from them. So I think it's wonderful, and I think that we need to start educating students. We need to bring people like the spaceport in. We need to bring outside people in, and then we need to look at the people that we have here that we're already utilizing those resources. And I think we have a great opportunity, and we're at the cusp of that, so I'm excited for that.
Mr. Brubaker.
Could you please repeat the question so I can understand it?
Sure. Because of our available land, climate, and proximity to the border, the Southwest has been very attractive to businesses that are looking to relocate and expand. What is your plan for New Mexico to stay competitive with business recruitment and development despite our low budget for economic development?
several things here. One is the regulations that we have in the state, I feel, are out of balance with expansion. The tax structure that we have right now favors out-of-town companies from even constructing these buildings if a facility was to move into town. Currently, this last session, there has been some changes made that lower the tax rates in certain areas to where businesses would come into this area. We have an opportunity to show the rest of the country that we have a high and dry climate. We're close to the border. We have rail services in place. We've expanded the area that trucks can come across the border delivering their products and staging them in the southern part of our state. We have an opportunity right now to take New Mexico forward and bring a lot of revenue into this state. We just need to work with the people and balance and be aware of what our neighboring states are doing, tax-wise.
We live in the desert with a limited water supply, yet we have very few restrictions on development. Should we consider restrictions, yes or no, and why?
We would have to look how that is presented. The farmers need the water to support the agricultural crops that we have now and feed people. Bringing another industry into the area, we need to be cautious of this problem that we do have. We are in a high dry area, and right now the reservoir at Elephant Butte is like, what, 6% of its capacity. So the farmers are struggling right now, and they're worried about where it's going to come. Speaking to some of the farmers, the pecan growers, they are very, very concerned and against growth of building any more houses in our community. However, the housing industry dropped off 85% 3 years ago, and we have several families that are out of work and split up and put in different parts of the country. We have to find a balance with industry, existing farmers, and our community so our people can eat and have the opportunity to grow.
I guess I would have to agree. I think that so many times, we live in a desert, and we need to make sure that we can make sure that we can water our crops, that we can get water down to our farmers and ranchers. We want to make sure that our agriculture continues to grow and it continues to prosper, and that we as a community can withstand what we're bringing in. So we need to be cautious. I think we can't be wasteful, and we have to protect our earth. We have to conserve what's been given to us, and that's our land is our legacy. So we need to really be mindful.
3 years ago, the state passed informed consent legislation which protects commercial spaceflight providers, but it lacks protection for commercial spaceflight manufacturers and costs jobs for the state. What is your position on expanding informed consent legislation to protect those commercial spaceflight manufacturers?
I was discussing this with a friend of mine the other day, and if you jump out of a perfectly good plane and you know that, and you're going to say go skydiving, you know those inherent risks. This is the same type of situation, and I don't think that should be passed down to other consumers and other manufacturers. We need to protect and bring businesses in, and we need to make sure that we're friendly and that we are not making so many restrictions that they can't do well.
This is one of the reasons I decided to run. I think this was the driving issue, the last item that pushed me over the edge to run for this office. When we're sitting here last year and hear that they did not pass this legislation, we thought that this is the end of our spaceport. Right now our spaceport is very unique. A couple other states have them, but we have a very unique situation here that is not sustainable unless we increase business. And increased business of just a few space flights is not necessarily the answer. We need other industry to set up shop and invite them into the area to flank this particular structure. It has to happen, because if Mr. Branson, Sir Branson, decides to pull his money out of New Mexico, we're stuck with a piece of concrete out in the middle of the desert. We can make this happen. One of the things I was referring to is visiting with a lady yesterday. She set up knocking on doors. She decided to start a vinyl graphics business out of her house to help supplement her income because of the hard time she was involved with. I mentioned to her that the way that we see it right now, if her vinyl is on the side of one of these trucks, saying a trash truck or water truck, and it happens to be in this area, and something happens up in space with one of these rockets, she could be named in this lawsuit. Okay. This has to change.
And we're out of time on that question. Fair disclosure before our next question. NMSU, like many public employers, participates in a state pension plan. It is likely that the state legislature will be considering bills to shore up the pension systems of public employees. If state employees are asked to pay more, should the state also pay an equal amount in additional funding? Yes or no, and why?
I would have to read more to answer yes or no to have a hard stance on that. I do believe that there needs to be a balance, and we need to hold our budgets to where we can support these pension plans. We've seen in Wisconsin to where that got inverted and the state was going bankrupt. We really need to be cautious. These are very, very important plans to these people, and we need to protect them. And we also need to work with the state to see where additional funding could come or be available to support that program. I don't know how else to answer that question other than we need to look into it, look in the future with a balance.
Well, I think we need to keep it solvent, and I think that's the key word. I think that there can be adjustments made, but we also need to look at who's been vested in. Somebody who's been working 20 years at this point should have to recalculate and work an additional year or 5 years to balance that out. We need to look at what's fair. We need to look at, you know, if people who are just starting and they know what they're getting into, at that point, that's where the changes should be made. But if you're already vested in, I don't think so. And I also think it's so important. These are major contributors, and they've been paying in and buying in, and so we need to make sure that we protect that. And those are also dollars that we'll continue to use within our communities.
Manufacturers in New Mexico are subject to a process that some call tax pyramiding, where they are taxed for the purchase of raw materials and on the sale of finished goods. What's your position on the removal of tax pyramiding for New Mexico manufacturers?
You know, I think that we need, once again, we need to be fair. We need to look at it objectively, but I don't think that we can tax at every level. We want to make sure that we are a business-friendly state. We want people to be attracted to come to this area. We want we can look at tax refunds, and we can look at different ways of doing it, but I think that if we tax and tax and tax, it's not going to benefit us as a state.
It's a good question. It is proven that our tax pyramid places contractors behind the Texas companies and other companies. Right now, you do pay taxes. You pay taxes on services, for instance, testing of soils and materials on a construction project. And then on top of that, rental equipment is also taxed to the state. And then once you put those two items together, you place another tax on it called the gross receipts tax. Texas companies do not have to participate in that program, and they already come into our state with up to a 5% advantage over contractors that do business in the state of New Mexico. That places New Mexico contractors and their workers at a huge risk of losing a project and at a very bad disadvantage. That's why a lot of people right now in this state are not employed and are looking in other states for employment. If families are split up at this time, it must be addressed. It has in last session, but a lot of this stuff needs to be passed to make it happen so we stop killing jobs in New Mexico.
Nearly half of states, including our neighbors, Texas and Arizona, have right-to-work laws that are widely supported by business groups. Unions argue these laws create a so-called free rider problem, in which employees benefit from collective bargaining without having to pay union dues. Would you support a right-to-work law in New Mexico? Yes or no, and why?
Absolutely. I would support a right-to-work law here in the state of New Mexico. That right now is not necessarily a job killer, but what is happening right now in New Mexico, manufacturing, when they're looking to explore other opportunities and go to our beautiful high dry desert area where we don't have items rusting, materials can sit outside and be safe. This is a very good place for manufacturing. So when they look at it, well, one of their checklists is New Mexico a right to work state? The answer is no. So automatically there's a negative placed on their checklist to relocate to New Mexico. I do believe in unions. I do believe in open competitive markets. Our construction company has participated in union contracts, closed shop, and open shop contracts. We were misquoted before about when we say having an open shop, a right to work state. That does not allow a non-union employee to come into and infiltrate and bust up a union shop.
Okay, Ms.
Not at all.
My answer is no. I believe that there is a place for unions, and I think especially in our area, there's so many agricultural workers that come over, and we need to make sure that people who can't speak for themselves have some type of fallback, and that they have a union rep, that they have somebody who can represent them. We want to make sure that they're given fair treatment. We want to make sure that businesses can come in and they can work here, but it's also fair for our community as well.
All right. Jobs are on the mind of every voter. What is your plan to bring more jobs to New Mexico?
You know, once again, I think we're at the cusp of being able to bring so many things to this area. You know, the railway, the interchange system, the spaceport. I think that those are all ways to bring more industry to this area. I also think, you know, it's going to bring more roads. You know, if we're using those industries, we're going to be needing more roads, we're going to need people to work more jobs. It's going to bring more people and give more people jobs within the area.
Unbundling of federal contracts. New Mexico loses so many revenues by the bundling of contracts. Large contracts hit our states in many different areas. No one wants to talk about unbundling a contract and breaking it down into sizes that allows contractors in the state of New Mexico to bid on this work. A lot of this work is way beyond the capacity of New Mexico contractors. However, New Mexico contractors build large projects. That needs to happen, number one. That would generate a lot of jobs in New Mexico. Second, in our district, we need to take a look at the RFP process, which is a request for proposal process within its state. We're talking within the state. That has to happen because right now, in the last 4 years in New Mexico, our district has lost so many jobs and our area has lost so much money because the revenues go in other parts of the states because of the possible pay-for-play schemes that are involved in RFP and construction management at risk programs.
Okay.
This is a serious issue.
All right. Do you support affirmative action in state employment, state contracts, and university admissions? Yes or no, and why?
No, I do not support affirmative action for this reason. I believe that you should be on the merit of your capabilities to do a project, to do a job. Our firm participates in what could be considered affirmative action program through the Small Business Development Agency, the Minority Business Development Agency of the United States, which is the 8A program. Our company, which I'm a vice president of, just recently graduated from that program. It's a wonderful program, but we've seen a lot of flaws because it lends itself to this issue of affirmative action. We do believe in supporting minorities. We are a minority contractor. But there needs to be some balance, and merit really needs to be weighed out properly.
And yes, I do support affirmative action. As a double minority, I know that sometimes that there are certain prejudice out there, and we want there to be, I would like to see that people have a voice and that they have a process to go through if they feel discriminated against. That's why those laws were put in. There's lots of history as to why that has happened, and we want to make sure that we have a level playing ground, and for those who have been discriminated, that they have recourse and the ability to correct those wrongs.
Each year, candidates talk about the need for ethics reform within the legislature. What are your ethics reform priorities, and how do you propose to implement them?
You know, as a social worker, I'm held to a standard, social work standards, that I have to yearly go and get training on, that I have to make sure that I've addressed, that I sign off, that I'm going to follow the code of ethics. And I think as somebody working in the legislature, that those same code of ethics should apply. We should make sure that we have a standard that we've agreed to abide by and that we will follow, because we need to remember that we're public servants. And by being a public servant, we need to serve the public, and we need to do that honestly. And there's got to be some checks and balances. And so I think that there should be some type of committee, some type of board, and that we are all under some type of training that we have to go through, and that there's a process. And if you're not abiding by that, that you can't continue to serve, or that there will be repercussions for that, because I think that once again we're public servants.
If anyone should break the law, they should be punished according to the law. Ethics reform is always very important, but it should be a continuing process to make sure if a legislature happens to step out of bounds, they should be notified. So there should be a watchdog group that clearly supports them in helping a legislature. Sometimes someone may have made a mistake without even knowing about it, with good intentions to help the people within their district. Someone needs to look after these people. However, right now, the way that contracts, I'm getting back to contracts because for us it's all about jobs and people starving in southern New Mexico. There is violations within the legislature and other agencies in the state of New Mexico right now with the request for proposals and the construction management risk programs that they're wanting to install. That was done 4 years ago, and the Santa Fe New Mexican recently published an article about the problems of this behind closed doors opening of contracts.
Okay.
That is why we have suffered so much in southern New Mexico to this day.
All right, thank you. New Mexico's medical marijuana law remains under attack if approved by the state health department, a proposal going before the state's Medical Cannabis Advisory Board would remove about 40% of patients from the program who receive cannabis to deal with symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. Do you support the medical marijuana law, yes or no, and why?
Well, I do believe we should have medical marijuana. That, as far as its use of medical marijuana, is not for me to decide. We would leave it to the professionals that are qualified to be able to make that determination. If indeed they support that, as a legislature, I would also support it.
Yes, I'm in favor of it with guidelines. I think that there's definitely been some studies that have been performed that say that there is a place for medical marijuana. PTSD, we know victims of cancer. We want to make sure if we have the means to alleviate pain and suffering, that we do that, but it also has to be done within regulations. It's got to be done under doctor's supervision, and we need to make sure it's done safely.
Doña County receives millions of dollars for infrastructure projects each year, which provides a great deal for our local economy. What are your infrastructure priorities for New Mexico?
You know, I had the opportunity to go to a town hall meeting in Anthony about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and it was Democracy in Action. They were talking about where they wanted to put lights up in their city. You know, they've just incorporated, and they need lights for safety. They were able to talk about different locations. I'd like to see that come to fruition. I would like to see the corridor to be finished. I think so many times we get pieces of monies and then we don't get enough money to fund full projects. And I think if we're going to do that, especially in these areas, we need to make sure that we have enough dollars to finish projects so people aren't left with either shoddy work, or we want to make sure that the streets are done correctly. We want to make sure that whatever we tell our citizens that we're going to complete, that we have full funding for that. And that means working together to get that. Thank you.
Well, there are codes and inspections that are conducted in the state. So I really am not understood, and it's been brought up before, about unfinished projects, because the state is not allowed to put a project out to bid unless it has full funding for that project. The project cannot be allowed to be constructed unless it can be completed. So I'm a little bit confused on that, and I've heard that before. You know, safety of our children and our families is very important as a public servant. The lighting of these certain areas, there's a lot of areas down south that are very dark and very scary walking through those areas. They need lighting, they need attention. But it shouldn't be just one section. It should be across the state. We should go out and find out where these needs are to keep our people of New Mexico safe. Lighting, of course, roads and structure, water is very important. Make sure we have groundwater that is not contaminated, and also work with the industries to make sure that everybody can work together.
Okay. New Mexico ranks near the bottom nationally in child welfare. What are your plans to improve child welfare in New Mexico?
And that is choosing to live here in New Mexico 31 years ago, and hearing that is horrible. Our 4 children made it through school. Our 4 children, the last 2 graduated from New Mexico State just a few years ago. No grandchildren yet, but it is so sad to hear this. My plans are to look into, number one, make sure they are covered in health insurance for our children. Make sure it's proper care that these children are given. From there, we also need to have them know that there's a spirit of the American dream that they can obtain, and that's through early education at home with the family and promoting faith-based initiatives to read to our children, make sure they're reading and understand the system before they get to the 1st grade. Then from there, continuing to educate them, offering other avenues rather than straight academia, which going through college, but also a different type would be technical support and technical jobs that are financed from other corporations.
I'm the executive director for Mesilla Valley Casa, court-appointed special advocates. We've been advocating for children in this area who have been abused and neglected for over 20 years. There is such a need in this area, and part of that is access to health care. We need to make sure kids are covered and that they have access to get treated medically, and I'm adamant about that. I also think that we need to get more preventative services, and we need to make sure that our most vulnerable are being taken care of. We also need to put monies in social services. You know, there continues to be cuts, but we are leaving the most vulnerable exposed, and we want to make sure that kids do not fall through the cracks. You know, Doña Ana County has had 4 horrendous deaths. We've had baby Brianna in this area, and we need to make sure that that does not happen. We need to make sure that kids are safe, and I am very adamant and very passionate when it comes to that.
When Governor Richardson removed gross receipts tax on groceries and medicine, he also agreed to hold harmless local municipalities for those lost monies. What is your position on hold harmless reimbursement for municipalities, and how do you propose municipalities make up the revenue should hold harmless be removed?
You know, I think we need to make sure that our police departments are funded, and we need to make sure that our firemen are funded, and that they have access to their own health care, and that they have funding. And so we need to make sure that those programs are funded. And so we need to look at, when we took out some of those gross receipts taxes, we need to look at how we can make up in other areas. And I know that there's ways to do that. There's tax credits, there's ways to attract businesses to help us to be able to do that. And that's what I would support.
I think the state should participate and not just leave the cities hanging out by themselves. It's wrong to have that happen. We need to make sure, of course, that these programs are properly funded, but we need to also work with the state and other businesses to see how that can happen. One of the things I truly believe in to increasing revenues in a state is to be able to have opportunities for our young people and our working class to be able to have the opportunity to have a job, something that, you know, they can hold the check in their hand with their name on it. Restoring that spirit. Too many people right now are without checks. We have to do what we can to bring more jobs to New Mexico and to work on the contract laws the way they are currently written through procurement. There is a great chance for growth in our area.
We thank very much the candidates in District 52, Republican Arlington Brubaker and Democrat Doreen Gallegos. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
And we conclude our debates with District 53. We welcome Republican candidate Ricky Little. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Great to have you here. Our first question is from the Greater Las Cruces Chamber of Commerce and Joel Courtney.
Many experts in education say that today's students will be in careers that do not even exist yet. How do you propose to better prepare New Mexico's workforce to fit this changing job environment?
The way I guess I would see that is part of it has to do with our education system as a whole. I look at especially our high schools as being, we're educating 100% almost, or 90-some% of our high school children to go to college. And when we look at the statistics, how many go to college? When we get down to it. We have approximately a 40% dropout rate, and then that leaves 60%, and you take that 60%, I would say half of them go to college, they're down to 30. If the dropout rate, what they say in college is half of those that go, we're looking at something like 15%. And what we've got to do is start gearing, I think, our high schools towards tech schools, whatever, there's always going to be jobs out there as compared to building houses, in the construction business. And if you've got a child that likes to play on his phone, his iPad, or whatever it is, think about it. This, you might, instead of them dropping out, we might get them at high school and say, they'd be able to get into a job system that would work for them.
Federal health reform was designed to expand Medicaid, with the federal government paying 100% the first 3 years and 90% thereafter. Do you support accepting this expansion, yes or no, and why?
I'm really not into accepting the expansion. I'll say right off the top, though, that I think that all of the children in New Mexico and anyone on Medicaid should have some type of health care. And but I see the federal government with the debt it's in, and the $1 trillion debt we go over every year, and when you look at Medicaid and Medicare, we're looking at $100 trillion. We know that 40% of our every dollar that comes from the federal government, that's 40% of it is just interest. So I mean, as a taxpayer, we're all losing valuable money that should be spent on things, and we're not, because we're putting it there. And I don't believe that the money is going to be there in the future for us to do this. And when I look at Chaparral, New Mexico, we do have clinics. I mean, this healthcare system was set up on insurance, but we do have clinics that work off of their income out there. And if you want healthcare in Chaparral, you can get it at the clinics that we have.
Because of our available land, climate, and proximity to the border, the Southwest has been very attractive to businesses looking to relocate and expand. What is your plan for New Mexico to stay competitive with business recruitment and development despite our low budget for economic development compared to our neighboring states?
I think the main thing that we need to do as in the legislature is we've got to do something with our taxes. When businesses are looking to relocate, or even businesses within our state that want to be created, we need to give them a tax rate, and whether it's a flat rate or whatever, something that's equitable and that is going to be comparable to other states around us. We've got to become a business-friendly state. The other thing would be reform. We've got to have our regulations reformed so that it's conducive for business to come here. If we have businesses come here, that's where our jobs come from, and I believe that's the point that the two main places that we need to concentrate on in the legislature.
We live in the desert with very limited water supplies, yet we have few restrictions on development. Should we consider restrictions, yes or no, and why?
Oh, absolutely we should consider restrictions. Because of the limited water that we do have here, we've got to conserve water any way that we can. There are certain things that we can do. Working with brine water, for one. If we can make brine water work and make it potable, or even to where we can use it as for agriculture, that's a great way to go. Recycling water. There's been great advances done in recycling water. Those are places we need. Our landscape that we have, especially within cities, municipalities, or other places that we can conserve water. We've got to, I mean, water is so precious here, we've got to do everything we can to take care of it.
3 years ago, the state passed informed consent legislation to protect commercial spaceflight providers, but it lacks protection for commercial spaceflight manufacturers, which has cost the state quite a few jobs. What is your position on expanding the informed consent legislation to protect those manufacturers?
I am all for it. We've got the spaceport here, which is a vital part of what we're doing here in New Mexico. And I believe that we need to make that a hub for this area with our graduates coming out of New Mexico State with aerospace technology. It's a business that can be very vital here. And you know, you have an inherent risk when you go up into space. This is something that's a new technology that we're doing. And if we even look at NASA, even with NASA, with all the money behind it, the federal government behind it, we still had some losses up in space. Those things may be inevitable. And if we can get the consent that if they're going to sign off on it, I think that who's going to be the ones in the lawsuit? It would be the people that are up there, or if something happened down here upon the earth, something happened as far as hitting, you know, if it exploded or whatever and came down. That would be the place, I guess, where you're still going to have some lawsuits can still be put in, especially if it's negligence. So I agree.
Fair disclosure before this next question, NMSU, like many public employers, participates in a state pension plan. It is likely the state legislature will be considering bills to shore up the pension systems of public employees. If state employees are asked to pay more, should the state also pay an equal amount in additional funding? Yes or no, and why?
One of the things that I'd like to assure all of our public employees, especially, that we trying to get them with the promises that we made to them and getting them what we promised is something that we need to try to do to the best of our ability in the state legislature. And as far as them paying more, if we look at what New Mexico pays and look at the states surrounding us, we have quite a lucrative the pension plan as it is. It's almost 25% of what the employee makes, and there's nowhere out in the private sector that anybody plays in 25% of their income for their retirement plan. Usually it's closer to something like 12 or 12 or 13, something like that, where they're already paying in, I think, at 13%, and the state is paying, or the state is paying 13%, and they're paying in 10%. And I think that's a very lucrative place to be. We just need to make sure that we can keep it there.
Manufacturers in New Mexico are subject to a process known as tax pyramiding, where they are taxed for the purchase of materials and on the sale of those finished goods. What is your position on the removal of tax pyramiding for manufacturers in New Mexico?
Who ultimately pays for that tax? The consumer is the one that pays for the tax. That means every product that they buy just ends up being higher. I don't believe in tax pyramiding. I think if we can put a good tax rate on it to where it's taxed at the final outcome of it, I think that's the best way to go. This reminds me of my particular job. I move buildings and structures and houses. When I move for a contractor that's working for the school district, I end up having to pay or charge about $1,000 to $500 more for that particular product, and then I have to charge tax to the school district, which is a tax-paying entity. And I think taxes on services is something we need to look at also. But tax pyramiding is just adding it on, and the consumer is the one that makes the final pay on that. So.
Nearly half of states, including our neighbors, Texas and Arizona, have right-to-work laws that are widely supported by business groups. Unions argue these laws create a so-called free rider problem, in which employees benefit from collective bargaining without paying union dues. Would you support a right-to-work law in New Mexico, yes or no, and why?
I would support a right-to-work law. I don't believe that just because you're a part of a company that happens to be unionized, and I don't have a problem with unions. If a company wants to be unionized or the employees want to be unionized, I think that's their prerogative. I think we have freedom in the United States and in New Mexico, and I think that freedom should be extended to our every employee, no matter whether he's part in a higher union type of a job where he's working for a company or not, especially in the place of the public. And in the place of the public, one of the places that I see is I believe that public unions, the only thing that they do is hold a hostage the taxpayer. because the taxpayer ends up paying the bill. And I don't believe in public entities being unionized.
Each year, candidates talk about the need for ethics reform within the legislature. What are your ethics reform priorities, and how do you plan to implement them?
Ethics priorities are is something that unfortunately we seem to be lacking, especially in the state of New Mexico. It seems like in a lot of places, and that's unfortunate. We've had pay to play. We have, as a matter of fact, my understanding is our last two treasurers are incarcerated at this time for ethics violations, for doing things, either taking money or doing things that they weren't supposed to do. And as far as ethics, forcing ethics upon somebody, if you don't have those morals, values, and priorities before you go into the state legislature, I'm not sure that you're going to be able to force that upon people. I would hope that, especially in elected positions, that the voter would find out about the people before they put them in there, and which would save us maybe a lot of these problems.
Our final question, do you support affirmative action in state employment, state contracts, and university admissions? Yes or no, and why?
No, I don't support affirmative action. I think maybe there was a time when affirmative action was probably a good thing, especially early on, maybe 50s, 60s, 70s era. But I think at this particular time we've got something going on which is reverse discrimination. I believe in if you merit, or if you have a higher education, or you fit a job better, and I believe that you should be able to get that. If you're going into college, there's no, with our school systems the way they are now, and the equal opportunity that we have out there within the United States and New Mexico as a whole, I believe that everybody has a fairly good opportunity to be at a medium, and I don't believe that some students, even if they're better qualified, should be kept out of college or kept out of a job for that matter. So,
Republican Ricky Little running in District 53. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
And Joel Courtney from the Greater Las Cruces Chamber, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us at home for the New Mexico State House debates. Thanks to our partner, the Greater Las Cruces Chamber of Commerce, and of course, thanks to you, our members. Your financial contributions make local, in-depth news and public affairs possible. You can become a member or renew your membership anytime at krwg.org. Have a great week.